Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast.
My name's Gavin Smith, and if you're joining us on video, then here's a little wave.
We're excited to have Nigel Ring join us.
I've never actually heard the word wicked and accountant put in the same sentence.
Well, welcome to the Church Office podcast. My name's Gavin Smith, and it's lovely to welcome you today. We are a church administration podcast. We love to talk about the work that happens behind the scenes. But one of our passions is to serve churches and to serve pastors. And today we've got a special guest. We've got Phil Swann on from Llanelli. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast, mate.
Oh, it's a real pleasure, Gavin. Real pleasure.
It's great to have you. And we're going to talk about various things. And I think Phil is aware of, he's serving as a pastor in Llanelli Free Evangelical Church. You'll fill us in on how long you've been serving various different things. But we want to talk about the pastor. We want to talk about the burdens and the challenges that they face. And I know there's some operational ones and administration ones, but also there are other challenges that they face, and how can we get alongside, how can we support and care for our pastor? So there's a whole range of things we want to cover. So Phil, tell us a bit about where you're based and your bit about your background.
Well, obviously based in Llanelli, centre of the universe. Been here 25 years now, just over 25 years.
Brilliant.
Before that, we served in a church in Bridgend for about 3 years and started in ministry in Pontefract in West Yorkshire.
Okay.
5 wonderful years. But I grew up in southwest London, though I am Welsh. My parents moved to the great mission field of London when I was just a month old.
Okay, wow.
But that's where I grew up. And I came to Cardiff in 1982, converted 1983. Reason for being in Cardiff, I was training to be a physiotherapist, where I worked until I went into the ministry in 1990. So that's it, basically.
Brilliant. And Phil, has been great. We've spent quite a lot of time together in the last year, and the church office has kind of been supporting the work a little bit there. Phil, tell us a little bit about how you kind of heard about the church office and how you got connected to us.
Well, I originally came across it via one of your podcasts, actually, which you did with Jonathan Thomas. And so that put me in touch. And I looked up your website, which, of course, is really well put together. And it just became, I suppose, highlighting an area of concern that I had. I'm not a natural administrator. Tended almost to be slightly suspicious of people who are overly administrative biased. But I've got to be honest, Gavin, you've been such a breath of fresh air with a real servant-heartedness, which has just been abundantly clear, not only to myself, but to the officers in Llanelli, and connecting admin with the work of the gospel. Yeah. So I think that's really been my journey into the church office.
Oh, mate, I appreciate that. That's kind. And I guess that's the phrase you hear if you've listened to the podcast, connecting, everything that we do to the gospel. And it is so significant, isn't it? Whether you're doing administration, whether you're teaching on a Sunday, we want good gospel doctrine. We want great gospel culture. And we want to see the gospel have its effect in every area of ministry, every area of church life. So, yeah.
Perhaps I could mention there, Gavin, I think I was a bit suspicious over the years because I'd encountered quite bad examples of people using process to effectively bang the brakes on the missional life of the church. And so I think that I used to find that quite frustrating. Yeah. So I was a bit suspicious of it, really, whether we'd get bogged down in miles of red tape or something like that. But nothing could be further from the truth.
I think as you get into it, it is almost quite liberating, or hopefully the process is liberating for pastors to go, actually, how we delegate, how we think about things, how we bring a little bit more process. And actually, when we talk about administration, it isn't just a skill, it is a gift to the church. And if we can identify people in our church with that spiritual gift, it can make a really big difference to have somebody alongside a pastor who may be just volunteering, who may be in a part-time role or a full-time role like myself, but to have that kind of gifting in the church, you do see the difference it can make. Do you think there are other pastors, Phil, who would be reluctant to look at this and administration because they've got weaknesses in there themselves and they don't want to adjust those and have that exposed in a way?
I'm sure there are, and I'm sure the reasons are very varied. Some pastors, I think probably all pastors to a certain degree, can be quite defensive.
Okay.
So the idea of somebody coming in and, we're going to lift the hood on the bonnet on the church and have a good old rummage around and see how you tick, really can be quite intimidating for some.
Yeah.
I think as well, if you're new into ministry and suddenly it's, all hands to the pump to find time to prepare for ministry, to get missional projects rolling, pastoral visitation, dealing with pastoral problems on top of that, and balancing perhaps transition from secular work into ministry and work-life balance and family, that's an awful lot.
Yeah.
And so I think for the admin stuff, you really have to be in a position where you can step right back and be objective and be open to constructive criticism and help. So I think there probably are different reasons. Some may have had bad experiences like myself, and some may even consider, admin failing to recognize, as you said there, that it is a spiritual gift, but seeing it more as almost an intrusion. I think pastors perhaps sadly can be a bit reluctant, but for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, and I think some of the other opposition I've found with other churches is that they're aware of weaknesses, but they see some of the solutions as being a business and like being business-like, and they don't think that the church should be business-like. So they put up a lot of defenses, and that can cause people to kind of not take on board some of the recommendations that you might or you can see. Do you think there's some truth in that as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that applies to lots of areas of church life, though things are better now. Like, pretty well all churches have to have a safeguarding policy. When those first were suggested, or it was a kind of recommendation from the government, there was all sorts of, this is the world coming into the church and we don't need this, but nobody blinks at that now. And I often think, well, we benefit from things like gift aid. So, there are policies already within church life. And so I think there's a diminishing of nervousness about this being worldly. A lot of it's how it's packaged, I think, and you do a great job with that.
That's kind of you. That's kind. And the back office review is what we call it. And basically, for those who don't know, we would go into a church, have a chat to the leader or the pastor of the church, talk about what are some of the challenges, what are some of the frustrations, where is their grace at work. We would speak to trustees, speak to individual elders and deacons, and it does take a bit of time because you get an hour with different people, but what you get is a real flavor for what's going on. And you did open the bonnet and let us in, and you were extremely humble. But what we can also see is a whole load of good that's happening behind the scenes in the church, and often just those small little connections and links, and improving communication, making our meetings more effective. We talked about, Phil, didn't you, that actually your team wanted more of you, where you were feeling like, actually, no, I don't want to keep pushing forward my agenda, but actually they were saying, no, we want you. We want to get behind your leadership. And you've got all those different dynamics going on, haven't you, for church offices when they come together. And it's interesting to have some observations from outside and say, have you thought about this? Would you consider doing it a different way? You might take one recommendation out of 10, and maybe that one will make a difference. But that's been part of the process. And Phil, would you recommend that to other churches?
Oh, 100%, 100%.
Okay.
And genuinely, there really is nothing to be afraid of here. Because I think, I can understand people thinking, oh, goodness, what if Gavin came and looked at us? What would he find? It's going to be terrible. But, if we're really concerned to be the kind of church that we need to be in terms of our serving of the Lord, sometimes we have to face up to things that there are areas that need to improve, areas that we need to value more. So I think if your heart is really set on, we want to move forward, definitely recommend it.
Being open to that. And it's lovely, isn't it, to turn with leaders to something like Acts chapter 6.
Yes.
And where Stephen is and his colleagues are deployed to do something. They're not going to be teaching, they're not going to be necessarily praying in the same way as these leaders are called. And there's this lovely deployment, isn't there? And then as you read through the text, you get to the end of it and you go, and the word of God expanded, it was preached, and there were more disciples, and you can see that, and as administrators we read that and go, oh, that's the part that we can play. I'd be a terrible preacher, and I'd be awful at trying to do what you do, Phil, but to come alongside you and to do something that God's called me to do in kind of organizing, mobilizing, equipping people, problem solving, which is all those things are going on in that text. It's lovely to see that. And so I think if we can convince pastors that actually there's a liberating role here of administration that liberates you as the individual, as the pastor, that you don't get bogged down with church admin, but finding ways that you can release that to enable you to do what God's called you to do. And I think most pastors would love that. But it's the bit in between of, how do I get to that point? What do I do? Which is the hard bit, I think.
It is. And, I think very much of your involvement with us is rather like that of a school governor who is to be a critical friend. And the emphasis is on friend, because it's clear that you want to see gospel success in the churches that you're supporting. So, it's not just criticism. Yeah, definitely.
No, it's far from that. So let's talk about pastors, and we the podcast, there are a lot of people who are operations based, who are similar to me. Talk about what it's like as a pastor and the pressures that you face, because that helps me to approach you or my pastors in a different way to how I might just want to bombard them with requests and demands. Talk to me about what life is like as a pastor.
Right. Well, it depends probably at what stage of pastoral ministry you're at, because I think things differ. If you're new into pastoral ministry, it's rather like when I did my first triathlon and someone said, when you start swimming, it's like, basically swimming inside a washing machine and people trying to break your nose at the same time. And the transition from secular work into pastoral ministry is huge for people, because you come into a context where generally there are no defined boundaries. And I think the key thing in terms of thinking it through, I would say to people, is you now have to think of a way of life rather than a role as such. But then as you go on in ministry, you get this cumulative pressure effect of the needing to prepare maybe 2-3 good messages a week, pastoral engagement. The more you get to know people, the more the problems start to come out, which is great. And I think the more your preaching is biblical, and the more there really is a work of the Spirit within a church community, that will create problems. The more your evangelism is effectively connecting with the community, the people who are going to come into your church, they have real problems. So the pastoral workload certainly increases the more you go on to ministry. And if you're not balancing the work-life, getting the work-life balance in some semblance of sense there, and you're not caring for your family and your own needs, the cumulative knock-on can result in really quite chronic exhaustion, spiritual dryness, lack of ambition, a very defensive mindset. And if you factor in some criticisms, which there always will be in the life of the church, your ability to maybe work with those become seriously diminished. And so as a result of that, sometimes when you've been in ministry a long time, it can be extremely burdensome.
Yeah.
That's probably the wrong thing to say, isn't it?
No, not at all.
Well, I always think of Paul, when he gives that long list of things in 2 Corinthians that he went through, but he shipwrecked, beaten up, left for dead, and then he rounds off at the end, but all day bearing the pressure of the churches.
Yeah.
And I think that just sums it up. Anybody who's been in pastoral ministry for a while gets that straight away.
And that's wise, isn't it? You're saying there demands from outside. You've got to care for your family. You've got to care for all the different aspects of church life that are happening, and the self-care is the bit that gets lost, isn't it? Your family can be one of the last things you get to, but you do get there. But that self-care as a pastor and those who have been in ministry, talk to us a little bit about that, because you've got some experience with this. I know you've written you've contributed to a book, and I'd love us to kind of hear a little bit more about that, Phil.
Well, the book isn't so much on self-care; it's actually on what abusive leadership.
Okay,
but I think,
we'll come to that next then.
But I do think there's a connection between the two, because I argue very much that hurt pastors, and pastors can be hurt by self-neglect.
Yes.
As well as by extrinsic things or things within the congregation, maybe an attack on their ministry or attempt to undermine it. But a hurt pastor often becomes fertile ground for, sadly, an abusive leadership.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that always happens, but you can put a ring of steel around yourself. You can say that is never going to happen to me again.
Yeah.
And in doing so, you can tread on people. But coming back perhaps to the issue of self-care, I remember a birthday card I had one year from my parents, and my father had just written that verse from Timothy. Can't remember exactly where, sorry. Watch your life and doctrine, for in this you will save both yourself and your hearers.
Nice.
So watching doctrine is something we tend to do quite well, but watching self. And the question is, what is the self? And that's a very neglected subject in our circles. We almost feel we shouldn't be asking that.
Yes.
But it's something that Scripture presents us with. We're made in the image and likeness of God, but we are embodied spirits. We have a body which requires rest and care, as we see with Jesus when he takes human flesh. He honors it by needing sleep, being hungry, being thirsty. So we have to find this balance of recognizing how God has made us and the need for care. So things like when I started in ministry, somebody said, always make sure you have a day off a week. And I think, to be honest, the first 5 years when we were in Yorkshire, that was pretty good. But, after that, it's gone a bit to pot, And I struggle with that. And of course, thinking about, a lot of people actually have 2 days off a week. Now, one of those is a Sunday. The other's probably a Saturday. They probably have a few evenings in the week where things are different. They're able to at least come home from work. Although that's less so now with online stuff. But as I said earlier, the ministry is a way of life. So you have to find what works for you. For some people, it may be, joining a gym or something like that, getting an hour a day. For someone else, it might be sitting in a coffee shop and reading a book or writing a journal or something positive like that. Those things can be helpful. But another really big key thing is a lot of people in pastoral ministry become isolated and they become lonely. They don't have friends outside of their marriage. And that again is something you have to work at in ministry. So there's probably loads we could say about self-care. And thankfully, there is a rising awareness of this.
I think there is, isn't there? Yeah, it's good.
And I think churches have a responsibility to explore that with the pastor, as well as the pastor himself.
And I think you're right. I think people in our roles, if you're listening to this as a church administration operations or a deacon in that role, you very much have got a responsibility to care for your pastor. you are going to see what they're doing and the effort they're putting in and the effects of the heart and the pressure that they face, that there are times where you've actually got to step in and say, you need to take a day off. You need to take some time. We need to be the ones who are prompting, saying, do you know what? Let's have a conversation about a sabbatical. When is that going to serve you? Because I haven't heard of pastors going on sabbatical for a long time. Is that just something that's dying out as we, enter this kind of new busy world that we seem to all live in? As deacons, we should be prompting that and caring for our pastors. So let me really encourage you to do that. Check in on your leader. How are they doing? What can you do to serve them that might take something off their plate that enables them to do what they need to do, or just gives them a bit of room and a bit of space to be able to have that time? So,
Amen.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's going to serve, isn't it? Because you need other people around you that actually say.
It's very hard for a pastor sometimes to put their hand up and say, I need help.
Yeah.
As it's hard for all of us.
Yeah.
But, the temptation again in pastoral ministry is somehow to think you're different.
Yes.
You're special. Now, being called is one thing. Being gifted and equipped is one thing. But being different and special, that it can easily go too far. So I think what you said there is really important. It's the principle of not muzzling the ox. So questions like, how are you coping financially? How are things in your marriage? How are things with the family? Are the children resenting you? Are the children resenting the church? Because of the time demands we're putting on you. Where are you going on holiday this year? Well, why only that? Is it because you can't afford it? Or I think having that sort of conversation, most pastors probably, even if churches don't have the resources, but I think having the conversation can actually be really helpful.
I think you're on something there. I hadn't even thought about holidays, hadn't even thought about that. But even just, the cost of living rises. How many pastors have had a pay rise in the last 2 years to support them through that? And it's very difficult, isn't it, if you're a single pastor in a church, to go, hang on, I need more pay here or more money here, because you're aware that everyone else in your church is struggling, and it feels wrong to say, can I have some more? But so let's do the work. And I was at a seminar talking to administrators, before, and saying, actually, sometimes we might have to actually build some of this into people's contracts when we're hiring them. How can I make sure that in somebody's contract that we employ them, that they have got opportunity to go to conferences to relate to people, that they've got time built in for sabbaticals, that where there are busy seasons, we are giving extended and longer holidays to people. Let's write some of this stuff that it's written down, so it's easy for somebody in that role as a pastor to be prompted to go, can I just point to that? Can we just have a review of that and see that happen in the next 2 months or whatever?
Absolutely. I mean, the principle of continuous professional development is obviously there in most professions, but it's rarely laid down in a more formal way within ministry. And I'm really grateful. One of the older deacons here, who's actually retired as a deacon now, is very strong on that with me. And the church resourcing financially, things like purchase of books, going on conferences, and investing like that, I think is really important. And as well as all that stuff we've talked about, there is always the big question, which is, Pastor, how are things with your soul? How is your prayer life? And I think friends are really helpful there. But again, if we're not careful, we become effectively unaccountable. Not by dint of a resistance of accountability, but there is no process, or people lack the confidence to ask that of a pastor. The easiest way to do it is to say to a pastor, what can I pray for you about this week? I have a friend who does that to me every week. What can I pray for you this week? And they do it, and they come back to me about it. And, that's when you get to know someone's heart.
I love that. So let's be encouraged to take those on board. And I think it's hard, it's hard for me to regularly remember what it's like for Pete and Lewis and Bob as they carry the burden for our church. it is so easy for me just to forget to think about my process, my agenda. So if anything, let's hear this and just go,
Can I
how do
bung
I
another
position myself? Go on.
one really quick thing? The key thing that pastors need is prayer.
Okay.
Because I can remember my first few months in ministry. I hadn't been in Yorkshire very long. With the senior pastor took time off, and I was just there, completely out of my depth,
Yeah.
struggling.
Yeah.
But I remember saying to my wife one day, if I just stayed in my study all day,
Yeah.
didn't see anyone, didn't have any meetings, no commitments, I would still be exhausted at the end of the day, with the awareness of the spiritual battle. And it really does ratchet up in leadership. And that's where there's a real need for prayer.
Yeah, that's great. And Nigel Ring has encouraged us before about praying together as deacons and elders, and those in kind of operational roles, because you do, when you hear your pastor pray, you hear the burdens and what's on their hearts, what are the challenges that they're facing. And so to be in the room together to do that, I love being in the room doing that. So I can hear Pete's heart and go, I could do something about that. I could help in some way. What can we, what fences do we need to put up just to defend him a little bit on this issue? Or, just those things are great. So real encouragements there. I feel that's so helpful for people, I think. And I mean, it's helpful for me sitting here as a reminder. So no, that's great. So let's talk about your book then and your contribution. Fill us in on what's happening there, because you've also got a conference coming up, and let's encourage people to those things.
Well, the book's called Challenging Leaders.
Yeah.
There you go.
Cha-ching.
Not the best cover, but there we are. It's basically been produced by Affinity, which is the old British Evangelical Council.
Yeah.
And there's a whole host of people who've contributed to this in different ways. And it's really looking at the very sad but situation we've got to face in churches, that leadership can go astray and it can become destructive.
Yeah.
And so what we've tried to do is put together a book that acknowledges this. We've got to get our own house in order as leaders, but at the same time seeks to be constructive. So, for example, what is healthy church leadership? What does good church process look like in relation to abuse of power in church? So things like complaints process, whistleblowing. Are these safeguarding issues? Are they not? And the thing that's really closest to my heart is the issue of how do we care pastorally for people who come to us who've been hurt and damaged by church. I have to say it can be church leaders who've been hurt and damaged, but it also can be people who've been on the receiving end of what some like to call spiritual abuse or pastoral malpractice or abuse of power in a Christian context. So that's the book. It's called Challenging Leaders. Most Christian booksellers have it. Have a think about that. I think it at least will stimulate a conversation. It hasn't necessarily got all the answers. And we're running a sort of a morning's conference in Cardiff on May the 20th. Again, Affinity are actually looking to run these all through the country, and Wales is first.
Great.
And so it's going to be, it is May the 20th. We're going to be held in the Heath Church in Cardiff on Whitchurch Road. They've been really accommodating. They're going to provide us with bacon butties, and it's an early morning start. It'll run through to about 1:30. So we jam-pack stuff in there, looking at what is healthy church culture, what is the effect of abusive leadership on people, what do we need to understand about that, how can we care, and a good session on process as well, with plenty of time for Q&A.
Great. I love
commercials
that.
Over.
Hey, commercials over. Hey, I'm always up for promoting these things. Yeah, they serve people, and that's wonderful. Do people need to book in, or have you got the links that you can pass on to me to promote?
Yeah, I'll let you know the links. But yes, pre-booking would be a massive helpful in terms of how much bacon we need. There is a small charge, but the charge will include the opportunity to have a copy of the book.
Okay.
So I think there's a 2-tier pricing system. So if you've already got the book, obviously you don't want necessarily 2 copies.
Yeah.
But if you haven't got it, it's a way of getting the book. But it's not just for church leaders. It's for anyone who's got a heart and a prayerful concern about the issue of abuse of power in the local church, which sadly we're hearing a lot more about.
Yeah, we are.
And if you've been on the receiving end of that, we really hope the day will be a help to you. Yeah.
Okay, that's useful. That's helpful. And Phil, I mean, you've become a bit of a go-to pastor on these kind of, soul care things. I know you run a stream for the Wales Leadership Forum, don't you? And is there anything that's up and coming that leaders can connect into on that side of things? If someone's listening to the podcast going, I'm on my own and I'm struggling, where do I go if you're not part of an organization or, affiliation in any way? Any thoughts on that?
That is a really big question. Where do we go? I mean, if you're not part of an affiliation, I suppose something like, dropping an email to the Soul Care Network at Wales Leadership Forum, that will come through to me. I obviously don't have all the answers, but I am quite well networked and can usually put you in touch with somebody who you can at least grab a coffee with and talk and begin perhaps to develop a supportive friendship in ministry. I do worry, Gavin, about pastors and church leaders who are isolated. And would really encourage them to say, there is a better way, and there are people out there who aren't just going to want to make life more difficult for you, but genuinely want to pray for you, listen to you, and support you. So, I mean, to be honest, there aren't a lot of natural points of reference if you're not already connected, but soul care is probably a good way. The other way would be just to drop a line to someone like the Evangelical Movement of Wales. So I have a trustee there involved with church leaders. So again, that would probably come through to myself or someone like Mark Thomas in North Wales. There is help out there.
Yeah, that's great. And if you do find yourself in that situation, pick up a phone to somebody, let somebody know how you're doing, and be honest. And I think that's a great starting point. Phil, in terms of pastors who are carrying this kind of operational burden, the church office can jump in and help. So, if you're listening to this, please go and check out our website. There are policies, there are helpful starters, even if it just gives you a bit of confidence, and hopefully some encouraging articles to help you think about some of the stuff that we do behind the scenes. And if there's something that the church office can do that can serve you, or you'd like to know more about the back office review, then please drop us a line at questions@the churchoffice.co.uk, and we'll connect in with you and hopefully serve you in some way. Phil, thank you so much for your time. Thanks for coming on the podcast and just sharing your heart and telling us a little bit about your link with the church office. It's been great to work with you, mate. And if there's anything else we can do to serve you and the church there, like pick up the phone and get in contact. We love you guys over there in Llanelli. So it's good to have a Welshman on the podcast.
Well, really appreciate it, Gavin, and genuinely, you've been a great servant of our church and the cause of the gospel here in Llanelli. So we really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, like I said before, if you've got any topics or questions that you'd love the podcast to cover, then please get in contact. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening, and thank you for connecting with us today. We'll see you again soon. Bye.